Welcome to Module 12, Lesson 1, Foundations of Research Ethics. Today, we embark on a critical journey exploring the ethical principles that underpin all research with human participants. Research ethics isn't just about following rules, it's about maintaining the trust that makes scientific progress possible. Let's begin. By the end of today's lesson, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of research ethics foundations. You'll be able to identify pivotal historical events that shaped our current ethical standards, analyze the core principles guiding ethical research, evaluate how ethics, law, and regulation intersect, and most importantly, apply these frameworks to real research scenarios you'll encounter in your career. These aren't abstract concepts, they're practical tools you'll use throughout your research journey. Why do research ethics matter so profoundly? Consider this. Every research study represents a social contract between researchers, participants, and society. Ethics protects vulnerable participants from exploitation and harm, a responsibility we cannot take lightly. It safeguards scientific integrity, ensuring our findings are trustworthy and valid. It maintains public confidence in the research enterprise, which is essential for continued support and participation. And pragmatically, it protects researchers and institutions from legal liability. Ethical research isn't optional. It's legally mandated through federal and international regulations required by professional organizations for membership and publication, morally imperative as we work with human lives and welfare, and scientifically essential because unethical research produces unreliable results. Without ethics, research loses its legitimacy and purpose. The modern framework of research ethics emerged from humanity's darkest chapters. During World War II, Nazi physicians conducted horrific medical experiments on prisoners, including hypothermia studies, high-altitude experiments, and sterilization procedures, all without consent. Japan's Unit 731 performed biological warfare experiments on thousands of prisoners. But violations weren't limited to wartime. At Willowbrook State School, mentally disabled children were deliberately infected with hepatitis. The Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital injected live cancer cells into elderly patients without their knowledge. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments and the Stanford Prison Experiment caused significant psychological distress to participants. These weren't anomalies. They reflected a research culture that prioritized scientific discovery over human dignity. Each violation taught us crucial lessons: that good intentions don't justify harmful methods, that vulnerable populations need special protection, and that researchers' judgment alone isn't sufficient safeguard. These dark chapters forced the global community to establish formal ethical standards. The suffering of these research subjects must never be forgotten. Their experiences shaped the protections we have today. The Nuremberg Code, established in 1947 during the trials of Nazi physicians, became the first international standard for research ethics. Its 10 principles revolutionized research practice. First and foremost, voluntary informed consent is absolutely essential. This was radical. It shifted power from researchers to participants. The code established that research must benefit society and be based on prior knowledge, including animal studies. It mandated avoiding unnecessary physical and mental suffering. Crucially, it stated no experiment should be conducted if death or disabling injury is expected. The risk must not exceed the humanitarian importance of the problem. The code required qualified scientists to conduct research and gave participants the right to withdraw at any time. Perhaps most importantly, it placed responsibility on researchers to terminate experiments if continuation would be harmful. These principles seem obvious now, but they represented a fundamental shift in research philosophy, from participants as subjects to participants as autonomous individuals with rights. The Declaration of Helsinki, adopted by the World Medical Association in 1964, built upon Nuremberg but added crucial nuances. It distinguished between therapeutic research, studies that might benefit participants, and non-therapeutic research conducted purely for knowledge. This distinction matters because risk-benefit calculations differ significantly between them. Helsinki introduced requirements for detailed research protocols and independent review committees, precursors to modern IRBs. It strengthened informed consent, recognizing that true consent requires understanding, not just agreement. The Declaration has been revised multiple times, most recently in 2013, reflecting evolving ethical challenges. Key modern additions include special protections for vulnerable populations, requirements for post-trial access to beneficial interventions, and mandates for research registration and transparency. Helsinki transformed from a physician's code to a comprehensive framework guiding all biomedical research globally. The Tuskegee syphilis study represents American research's most shameful chapter. For 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service studied untreated syphilis in African American men in rural Alabama. Researchers enrolled 600 men, 399 with syphilis, 201 without, telling them they were receiving free health care for bad blood. The deception was systematic. Participants never learned they had syphilis. When penicillin became the standard treatment in 1947, researchers deliberately withheld it. They prevented participants from accessing treatment elsewhere, even intercepting draft notifications during World War II to keep men from receiving military medical exams that would reveal their condition. The study only ended when a whistleblower went to the press. By then, numerous men had died, wives had been infected, and children had been born with congenital syphilis. The aftermath was profound. Congress passed the National Research Act, establishing IRBs nationwide. The Belmont Report was commissioned to establish ethical principles. Most significantly, Tuskegee created lasting mistrust of medical research in African American communities, a legacy that affects participation rates and health disparities today. This wasn't just unethical research, it was a multi-generational betrayal of trust. The Belmont Report, published in 1979, became America's foundational ethical framework, distilling research ethics into three core principles that remain central today. Respect for persons encompasses two key ideas. Individuals should be treated as autonomous agents, capable of making their own decisions, and those with diminished autonomy, children, prisoners, people with cognitive impairments, deserve a special protection. This principle drives our informed consent processes. Beneficence obligates researchers to maximize possible benefits while minimizing potential harms. It's not enough to avoid causing harm. Research must be designed to potentially benefit participants or society. This principle guides our risk-benefit assessments. Justice demands fair distribution of research benefits and burdens. We cannot exploit vulnerable populations for research that benefits only the privileged. This principle ensures equitable participant selection. These aren't just abstract concepts, they translate directly into practice. Respect becomes informed consent. Beneficence becomes risk-benefit analysis. Justice becomes fair participant selection. Every IRB application you write will reference these principles. Today's research landscape presents ethical challenges the Belmont authors couldn't have imagined. Big data research can analyze millions of people's information without traditional consent. Should publicly available social media posts be fair game for research? Genetic research and biobanking raise questions about future use of biological samples. Who owns genetic information? How do we consent for unknown future research? Global health research highlights international inequities. Is it ethical to test interventions in developing countries that those populations could never afford? AI and machine learning can perpetuate and amplify societal biases. How do we ensure algorithmic justice? The COVID-19 pandemic created pressure to accelerate research. How do we balance urgency with ethical rigor? These modern challenges require us to thoughtfully apply traditional principles to new contexts. The principles remain relevant, but their application requires constant re-examination. Let's explore the universal ethical principles that guide all research. The four primary principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice form the foundation. Autonomy recognizes individuals' right to self-determination. Beneficence obligates us to do good. Non-maleficence requires avoiding harm. Justice demands fairness and equity. Additional principles enrich this framework. Veracity requires truthfulness in all research interactions. Fidelity means faithfully honoring our agreements and responsibilities. Confidentiality protects participants' privacy. These principles don't exist in isolation. They interact and sometimes conflict. Understanding their relationships helps navigate complex ethical decisions. Think of them as complementary lenses through which to examine research ethics, each revealing different important considerations. Respect for persons and autonomy recognize that individuals have the right to make their own decisions about research participation. This isn't just about getting signatures on consent forms. It's about ensuring genuine understanding and voluntary choice. Autonomy means participants must have adequate information presented comprehensibly, time to consider participation without pressure, and freedom from coercion, subtle or overt. We must recognize that autonomy exists on a spectrum. Some individuals, children, people with cognitive impairments, prisoners, may have diminished capacity for autonomous decision-making and require additional protections. In practice, this translates to robust informed consent processes, the unconditional right to withdraw from research, protection of privacy and confidentiality, and special safeguards for vulnerable populations. Every interaction with participants should reflect respect for their autonomy and dignity. Beneficence and non-maleficence are complementary principles often considered together. Beneficence actively promotes good. Research should be designed to benefit participants or society, maximize potential benefits, and ensure scientific validity so results are meaningful. Non-maleficence, first, do no harm, requires minimizing risks, anticipating potential harms, and monitoring for adverse effects throughout the study. These aren't passive obligations. They require active effort. The challenge lies in balance. Almost all research involves some risk, but risks must be justified by potential benefits. This risk-benefit analysis isn't mathematical. It requires careful judgment considering probability and magnitude of potential harms, likelihood and significance of benefits, and whether risks are reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits. This balance is central to ethical review. Justice in research ensures fair distribution of benefits and burdens. Historically, vulnerable populations bore research risks, while privileged groups reaped benefits. The principle of justice corrects this inequity. Distributive justice asks critical questions. Who bears the burdens of research participation? Who will have access to resulting benefits? Are selection criteria scientifically and ethically justified? We must avoid exploiting vulnerable populations, while also ensuring they're not excluded from potentially beneficial research. Consider clinical trials for expensive medications. Is it just to test these in low-income countries, where participants will never afford the treatment? Conversely, is it just to exclude these populations from research that might benefit them? Justice requires thoughtful consideration of historical context, social vulnerabilities, and power dynamics. It demands that research participation opportunities and benefits be distributed fairly across society. Ethical principles aren't universal constants. They're interpreted through cultural lenses. Western bioethics emphasizes individual autonomy, but many cultures prioritize communal decision-making. In some communities, family or tribal leaders must approve participation, not just individuals. Communication styles vary significantly. Direct questioning about sensitive topics, standard in Western research, may be considered rude or inappropriate elsewhere. Some cultures rely on oral rather than written traditions, making standard consent documents problematic. Navigating these variations requires cultural humility. We must respect local customs while maintaining ethical standards, avoid imposing Western values as universal truths, engage communities as partners in developing appropriate procedures, and recognize that effective ethical practice must be culturally responsive. This isn't about lowering standards, it's about implementing them in culturally appropriate ways. Ethical principles often conflict, requiring careful balance. Individual autonomy may clash with community benefit. Should we override individual preferences for public health research? Scientific progress might conflict with participant protection. How much risk is acceptable for important research? Transparency requirements may threaten confidentiality. How do we share data while protecting privacy? Resolution requires systematic approaches. Stakeholder consultation brings diverse perspectives. Ethical deliberation processes. Structured decision-making. Proportionality assessment weighs competing values. And precedent consideration provides guidance from similar situations. There's rarely a perfect solution. Ethical research requires acknowledging tensions, transparently documenting reasoning, and accepting that reasonable people may disagree. The goal isn't eliminating all ethical tensions, but managing them thoughtfully and transparently. Different philosophical frameworks offer distinct approaches to ethical decision-making. Consequentialism, exemplified by utilitarianism, judges actions by their outcomes. Does research produce the greatest good for the greatest number? This framework supports research with significant societal benefits, even if individuals face risks. Deontology focuses on duties and rules. Some actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of consequences. This framework emphasizes absolute principles like informed consent, even if waiving consent might benefit more people. Virtue ethics asks what a virtuous researcher would do, emphasizing character traits like honesty, compassion, and integrity. Care ethics prioritizes relationships and empathy, focusing on maintaining caring connections with participants. Each framework offers valuable insights. Most researchers unconsciously blend approaches, and understanding these frameworks helps make ethical reasoning more explicit and systematic. Let's apply these frameworks to a realistic scenario. Researching a stigmatized condition in a vulnerable population with potential for significant societal benefit. A consequentialist would calculate whether benefits outweigh risks, considering total societal gain against individual costs. They'd support the research if net benefits are positive. A deontologist would ask whether we have a duty to protect vulnerable populations from exploitation, regardless of potential benefits. They might require stringent safeguards or oppose the research entirely. A virtue ethicist would consider what an ethical researcher would do, balancing scientific pursuit with compassion and integrity. A care ethicist would focus on maintaining respectful, caring relationships with participants throughout the research. In practice, we integrate insights from all frameworks. We calculate consequences while respecting absolute principles, embody virtuous character while maintaining caring relationships. This integration creates nuanced, defensible ethical positions. Developing your ethical stance is an ongoing process. Consider your disciplinary context. Different fields emphasize different ethical priorities. Reflect on your research nature. Observational studies raise different concerns than interventions. Understand your population's characteristics and vulnerabilities. Account for cultural and institutional settings. Most importantly, acknowledge your personal values while remaining open to growth. Your ethical approach should be consistent but not rigid, principled but responsive to context, grounded in frameworks but attentive to specifics. Document your ethical reasoning. Be transparent about your approach. Recognize that ethical development is lifelong. Your understanding will deepen with experience. The goal isn't achieving perfect ethics, but committing to continuous ethical reflection and improvement. Ethical principles translate into practice through regulatory frameworks operating at multiple levels. International guidelines like the Declaration of Helsinki and SIEM's guidelines provide global standards. ICHGCP governs clinical trials worldwide. UNESCO declarations address emerging issues like genetic research. National regulations operationalize these principles. The Common Rule governs U.S. federally funded research. Europe's GDPR revolutionized data protection standards. Countries develop specific laws reflecting their context and values. Funding agencies impose additional requirements. This multi-layered system can seem overwhelming, but each layer serves a purpose. International guidelines ensure global standards. National regulations provide legal force. Institutional policies address local contexts, and professional codes maintain disciplinary standards. Understanding this landscape is essential for conducting compliant, ethical research. Institutional review boards, IRBs, or ethics committees, serve as practical gatekeepers of research ethics. Their purpose extends beyond bureaucratic approval. They protect participants from harm, ensure ethical standards are met, review and approve research protocols, and monitor ongoing studies. Review levels reflect risk assessment. Exempt review applies to minimal risk research using existing data or educational practices. Expedited review covers slightly greater than minimal risk studies. Full board review addresses complex, higher risk research. IRBs focus on key areas. Is the risk-benefit ratio acceptable? Is informed consent adequate and appropriate? Is participant selection fair and justified? They bring diverse perspectives. Scientists, non-scientists, community members, ensuring comprehensive ethical review. While the process can feel burdensome, remember that IRBs share your goal of ethical, valuable research. Professional organizations maintain discipline-specific ethical codes that complement general principles. Psychology's APA Ethics Code, Sociology's ASA Code, Medicine's AMA Code, Social Work's NASW Code. Each reflects unique disciplinary contexts while maintaining core commitments. Common elements cross disciplines. Competence requirements ensure researchers have necessary skills. Integrity standards demand honesty and accuracy. Professional responsibility includes mentoring and collaboration ethics, and respect for rights and dignity underlies all professional codes. These codes aren't just guidelines, they're professional obligations. Violations can result in loss of membership, publication bans, and career consequences. More importantly, they represent collective wisdom about conducting ethical research in specific fields. As we conclude, remember that research ethics isn't a hurdle to overcome, but a foundation to build upon. Ethics evolved from historical failures. We must learn from past mistakes. Core principles: respect, beneficence, justice guide all research decisions. Multiple frameworks inform ethical reasoning, each offering valuable perspectives. Regulations operationalize abstract principles into concrete requirements. Most importantly, ethical development requires continuous reflection. Your next steps: deeply explore your field-specific ethical codes. Prepare for IRB processes at your institution. Reflect on your personal ethical stance. Commit to ethical excellence, not just compliance. Research ethics protects participants, ensures scientific integrity, and maintains public trust. As you advance in your research career, let ethical considerations guide every decision. The measure of great research isn't just its findings, but how those findings were obtained. Thank you for joining me in exploring